His character hates my character because I'm with his wife.
I don't know if I helped Daniel make up his mind. We talked about that period of time. So go do it. If you got it, run with it.
He played the world's coolest spy, but off camera, Pierce Brosnan faced battles no script could prepare him for. Fame, grief, betrayal, and 5 names he never forgot. For the first time, the man behind 007 breaks his silence. From lost friendships to cold betrayals, these 5 actors left a mark he couldn't forgive. One took the role he dreamed of. Another made filming a nightmare. One nearly destroyed everything. Who are they? And what really happened? The answers may surprise you. This isn't gossip. This is personal. Timothy Dalton. When Pierce Brosnan first heard whispers that Timothy Dalton had been cast as James Bond, it wasn't just a professional loss. It was personal. The 2 men weren't enemies. In fact, they were friends. That made it worse. Back in the mid-1980s, Brosnan had been handpicked by Bond producer Albert "Cubby" Broccoli himself as the future of the franchise. The stars had aligned. He had the looks, the presence, and the charm. Even Ian Fleming's widow had said Pierce was exactly what her late husband had envisioned for Bond. But then, at the height of anticipation, something unexpected shattered his chances. Brosnan was the leading man in Remington Steele, and when the show was cancelled in 1986, it looked like he was finally free to step into Bond's tuxedo. Broccoli had made it clear, if Brosnan could act, the role was his. It wasn't just hearsay. Brosnan had been invited to meet the Bond team on the set of For Your Eyes Only, where his then-wife Cassandra Harris had a role. Everyone expected him to be the next 007. But as soon as the Bond rumors heated up, NBC saw a ratings opportunity. They reversed their cancellation of Remington Steele and ordered more episodes. Due to his contractual obligations, Brosnan was forced to decline the Bond offer. It was soul-crushing. And that's when Timothy Dalton stepped in. Dalton had been on the Bond shortlist for years, even before Brosnan. And when the opportunity opened again, he was offered the part. Brosnan could only watch from the sidelines as his close friend took the role that had been promised to him. In an industry filled with backstabbing and opportunism, Dalton had done nothing wrong. He was simply the fallback. But to Pierce, it felt like losing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to someone he knew well. "I had to smile through it," Brosnan once said. That smile hid a massive personal and professional disappointment. Dalton's portrayal of Bond was a departure from the charm and humor of Roger Moore. His Bond was gritty, intense, and more grounded, a deliberate shift to match the Cold War era's tension. But that change didn't sit well with everyone. Though The Living Daylights, 1987, did well internationally, License to Kill, 1989, underperformed in the US, grossing just $34.7 million. Many critics and fans felt it lacked the spark that Brosnan could have brought. In hindsight, some even argued that Dalton was a placeholder, keeping the seat warm until Brosnan could return. But at the time, it felt like the door had been slammed shut permanently. Watching a friend become just a symbol of everything that has been taken from him has been too hard and downright torturous for Brosnan. The friend, Dalton, does exactly that. He becomes the torture symbol as he owns the character. It meant that Brosnan had to contend at this time with the heart-wrenching fact that his beloved wife, Cassandra, was suffering from ovarian cancer. That suffering indeed compounded the professional hurt. The dream that had been Bond was that for her more than for him. She believed in him before anyone else did. Now, from being sick, Brosnan's chance at Bond was lost, and the man filling the void was one he had once shared jokes and drinks with. Brosnan carried on working through the years that have now been referred to by fans as the lost years. Between 1986 and 1994, he spies in the Fourth Protocol and suited up in Diet Coke commercials that teased the Ellington-esque style of Bond without ever naming it. He stayed visible, but the hurt never fully left. In those quiet years, Bond became a ghost, haunting his career. Dalton's Bond blazed and flickered. Brosnan's time never seemed to come. Then, in 1994, when Dalton finally stepped down and the franchise sought a new direction, Brosnan got the call into action. Finally, the part was his now. Yet, the baggage of emotions had still not faded. Even after Brosnan became the official Bond with his first film, GoldenEye, back in 1995, during which the franchise would rise and earn over $350 million internationally, he never said anything bitter in the public domain regarding Dalton. But those who were close knew very well of the history. Dalton stood as an unanticipated bottleneck. A good guy, yes, but in Brosnan's heart, an indentation of pain for a moment snatched away. Pierce didn't hate Timothy. He hated what Timothy represented, a closed door, deferred dream, and broken promise, as one industry insider rounded off their comments. However, after time, those rounded edges have not eroded. The eventual legacy of Brosnan's Bond became iconic. 4 films and more than $1.64 billion at the box office, and a generation to whom he was nothing less than the definitive 007. But beneath that polished image lay the shadow of Timothy Dalton, a friend turned rival, not of malice, but a cruel twist of time and contracts. In a career earned by charm, it was not really all that hard, given the success of Dalton, but that Brosnan was supposed to be first. If you thought losing Bond to a friend was hard, wait until you see what Pierce lost next. Christopher Brosnan. To the world, Christopher Brosnan was simply Pierce Brosnan's adopted son. But to Pierce, he was more than that. He was a second chance at a fatherhood he never received himself. Christopher entered Pierce's life when he married actress Cassandra Harris in 1980. Cassandra had 2 children from a previous marriage, Charlotte and Christopher. And when their biological father, actor Dermot Harris, died in 1986, Pierce legally adopted them. They took his name, but more importantly, they took his love. He became the father he never had, promising to give them everything he was denied in his own fractured childhood. At first, Christopher seemed to thrive under Pierce's guidance. He was bright, energetic, and deeply bonded with his sister and younger half-brother Sean. Pierce once said that when Cassandra and the children came into his life, it wasn't a matter of being a father, it was being a family. For several years, they lived as a close-knit unit. But when tragedy struck in 1991, everything started to unravel. Cassandra was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and passed away after a brutal 4-year battle. Her death shattered the family. Pierce lost the woman who had given him stability, and Christopher lost the one person who had always anchored him emotionally. Christopher was only 19 when Cassandra died, and the loss hit him harder than anyone expected. While Pierce buried his grief in work and fatherhood, Christopher quietly spiraled. He tried to stay close to the family by working behind the scenes on Pierce's Bond films like Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough. But there were signs of instability. In 1996, Christopher was fined £1,000 for drunk driving. A year later, he was arrested again, this time sentenced to 3 months in prison for a repeat offense. Pierce tried to help, covering legal costs and extending olive branches. But something deeper had cracked. After the arrests came the substances. Christopher fell into London's underground substance scene, dabbling in GHB and eventually hard substances. The addiction took hold quickly. He collapsed outside a London club and fell into a coma. In 2012, at the age of 32, he was arrested again for hard substance possession. The tabloids were ruthless, highlighting his last name more than his condition. To them, he was the Bond actor's junkie son. But to Pierce, this was a living nightmare. His adopted son was disappearing before his eyes, just as Cassandra had. Another life fading under a weight he couldn't lift. Pierce had thrown himself into his family life. It was not just love for children. He needed them. His children anchored him in an industry that so often robbed men of their souls. But Christopher became the representation of that which Pierce hated most: powerlessness. He was there for Cassandra through every chemo session, every hospital visit, every sleepless night, and even then lost her. And now As he watched the same pain unravel Christopher, he was all too aware of that powerlessness. On a day alone, Pierce confided in a friend, "I hate what this world did to him. I hate that I couldn't stop it." By the year 2024, Christopher had entered into a near 20-year-long vanishing act. Then came the Slayer shot. The paparazzi found him outside a grocery store in London, gaunt, weathered, and all alone. He was only 51, but looked like the worse for wear. The contrast from those who remembered him as the smiling little boy beside Pierce on red carpets was striking. He is but a ghost of the man he could have been. Quite a long move from the Hollywood sets and family dinners. Their world was far from the pace of life that Pierce once tried to create. Though never going public against him, Pierce's silence said it all. The grievance, the shame, and the pain that gnawed deeply at him. Christopher never really had a funeral, not the kind with tears and memories. He never went through death. He just faded away. Addiction took him bit by bit, year by year, until the man was practically a stranger. Pierce had buried Cassandra. Then, in 2013, he buried Charlotte, his adopted daughter, who had succumbed to the same cancer that took her mother. To lose Christopher to another illness, one born out of trauma and grief, signified the sad trilogy of loss. 3 of his dearest, 3 lives that were swallowed whole by forces Pierce was powerless to contend with. In the media or discussion platforms, Pierce is relatively mum regarding Christopher. However, sometimes, when he does speak of him, he does so almost in a scripted tone as if he has been prepared for it. There are, however, sources who claim that he keeps quiet while making sure that he knows what happens. He sends assistance through third-party sources and would also call a few friends in London to have a look at what is happening with the actor. He never really let go, although eventually he learned to let go, said one friend. "Sometimes love isn't enough," he would say. "Sometimes the person you're trying to save doesn't want to be saved." And that pretty much above, more than Dalton, more than the execs at the studio who betrayed him, is what Pierce still most hates. Daniel Craig. When Pierce Brosnan hung up the tuxedo after Die Another Day in 2002, he had no idea it would be the last time he played James Bond. He wasn't just the star of a billion-dollar franchise. He was Bond for a generation. That final film had earned $431.9 million, making it the highest-grossing Bond film at the time. Brosnan was in peak form, physically fit, training for the next installment, and already pitching creative ideas for Bond 21. Everything was on track, until a single phone call ended it all in 47 seconds. "You were a great James Bond. Thank you very much. Goodbye." That was the message, delivered cold and without ceremony. Behind the scenes, Eon Productions had made their decision months before calling Brosnan. They wanted a younger Bond, someone to reboot the franchise and take it in a grittier direction. What Brosnan didn't know was that while he was still promoting Die Another Day, the producers had already been screen testing other actors, including Daniel Craig. Internal emails would later reveal a brutal reality. Brosnan was considered too expensive, too old, and ironically, too Bond. His own success had become his downfall, and the role that had saved MGM from bankruptcy and made him a global icon was handed off with shocking indifference. Brosnan was devastated. The betrayal cut deep, not just because he was fired, but because of how it was done. After 4 successful Bond films, after nearly a decade of loyalty, there was no meeting, no farewell, no gesture of thanks, just a call, when he was alone, on location in the Bahamas. He later said, "It was utterly shocking. I was completely bewildered. I thought we were doing Bond 21. The suddenness of the dismissal and the silence from the studio felt like a knife in the back. And the man stepping into his role, Daniel Craig, an actor Pierce didn't know personally, but who came to represent everything that was taken from him. When Casino Royale was announced with Daniel Craig as the new Bond, the backlash was immediate. Longtime fans questioned the casting of a blonde, lesser-known actor. Brosnan, still nursing fresh wounds, watched as the franchise he helped resurrect was rebuilt without him. He tried to stay gracious in interviews, saying, "I wish him well," but the pain was obvious. According to insiders, Brosnan felt blindsided, not just by the studio, but by the lack of any personal outreach from Craig himself. No call, no message, no acknowledgement of the man who had kept the franchise alive through the 1990s. Yet, nevertheless, Casino Royale became a big blockbuster. Craig's brutal, emotionally raw Bond portrayal was praised by critics. It was a darker one, devoid of glamour, more Jason Bourne than Roger Moore. Grossed $616.5 million, helped reframe franchise under the touch of a new generation. For Brosnan, the success was bittersweet. On one hand, Bond survived. The other, it did so without him. He would later say that it was like watching someone else raise your child. He lost much more than a role. He had been erased from the future of something he helped rebuild from the ashes. The other issue was identity. Brosnan's career after Bond suffered heavily after the sacking. His price dropped from $12 million to $3 million. He was what the studios had said to devalue because they were viewing him as too much associated with Bond to be viable anywhere else. He was too Bond, read one internal note by an executive. Even Pierce's entourage had to shrink. He laid off 12 people in the aftermath. Depression went very deep. His children have seen him cry for the first time. The rejection from Bond producers felt like abandonment, not just in the professional context, but personal as well. It just looked ugly that the franchise chose not to reach out to Brosnan. He spent much time trying to reclaim his footing and doing turns in indie films and romantic comedies before rounding out his resume with a variety of big-budget purses like Black Adam. Bond was the ghost in the room. Brosnan watched Craig lay down 5 films in a span of 15 years, his demeanor indicating disapproval. He has never openly criticized Craig, yet his comments over the years have made it clear that he felt the entire process could have been done better. "There should have been more grace, more class," he said on one rare occasion when he spoke candidly. Instead of throwing him away, they could have celebrated. In the end, Brosnan did not hate the man Daniel Craig. He hated what Craig stood for. The abandonment of the studio, the silence, a sudden dismissal after a decade of commitment. Craig was never the villain, but in Brosnan's mind, he became the symbolic replacement, the man who got the future Pierce was promised. And that quiet agony has never faded. Brosnan is gracious about it, but those close to him affirm that there are real scars from Bond, and Craig will always be part of them. Keep your sympathy close, because what comes next will leave you stunned. This wasn't about contracts or casting, it was personal, and it got ugly. A-list diva co-star Pierce Brosnan is known for being one of the most gracious and grounded actors in Hollywood. Despite decades of loss, career betrayal, and emotional trauma, he's maintained a reputation for professionalism and quiet strength. That's why when rumors surfaced about tension on the set of Mamma Mia, people were shocked to hear his name mentioned until more details emerged. The tension wasn't because of Pierce, it was because of someone else, a legendary co-star. Described by insiders as an A-list diva, had turned the joy-filled set into a pressure cooker, and Brosnan hated every minute of it. Christine Baranski, a cast member of both Mamma Mia films, revealed in 2025 that one particular co-star made filming a nightmare. While she didn't name names, fans and insiders quickly speculated. Many pointed fingers at the biggest name in the cast. But those close to Brosnan clarified, Pierce wasn't the problem. He was the victim. Known for his warmth and patience on set, Brosnan clashed hard with someone who demanded constant rewrites, showed up late, and treated crew members like background props. He almost walked off Mamma Mia. Here we go again, one production assistant later revealed. Pierce had joined Mamma Mia after years of intense roles, Bond, thrillers, dramas. The film was supposed to be a breath of fresh air, Set in the Mediterranean with a feel-good musical tone, it seemed like the perfect space for healing and play. But instead, he found himself stuck in a creative battlefield with someone who controlled the tone of the entire production. Every day was a guessing game, another crew member said. Would she be pleasant today, or would she make someone cry? That inconsistency ran counter to everything Brosnan believed in. What made the situation more personal for Pierce was his connection to the film's themes. Mamma Mia was about love, second chances, and family, things he held dear after losing his wife Cassandra and daughter Charlotte. For him, acting in the film was more than a paycheck. It was emotional expression, but his co-star didn't share that sentiment. According to reports, she treated the film as beneath her, making passive-aggressive remarks about the script, costumes, and other cast members. For Pierce, who had trained in Shakespeare, mime, and classical theater, that kind of disrespect was unacceptable. Brosnan had done his best to maintain his calm composure, according to several members of the crew, even under the strain of being openly disrespected. There was one day when the actress said she would not rehearse unless her trailer was moved nearer to the set. Another day, she demanded costume changes right before filming. Brosnan, reportedly trying to smooth things over, told the director, "Just get the scene. I'll adjust." However, the frustration was growing. He hated how she treated the people around her. One set decorator said, "He's the kind of guy who shakes hands with the gaffers." She didn't even look them in the eye. Pierce's aversion had not come from ego, it had come from values. Quiet tenacity had been the very foundation upon which Pierce had constructed his entire career. As a child who had grown up fatherless and shuffled between relatives, Pierce learned the hard way how important kindness and consistency are. Very great experiences with the loss shaped him into a very empathetic human being. So watching someone derail an entire production with petty demands and mood swings hit a nerve. He said it reminded him of everything he hated about Hollywood. An old friend later shared, the narcissism, the cruelty, the entitlement. To exacerbate the situation, certain tabloids attempted to manipulate the narrative to support the actress. The supposed evidence was photographs of Brosnan, whether looking tense or frustrated, that were interpreted to mean that he was the one causing trouble. But sources near to the production maintained a counter-position. He was protecting people, opined one assistant director. He hated the energy on set. He hated that nobody was brave enough to confront her. But he never lashed out. He just distanced himself. And when the film finally got wrapped, Brosnan absconded from several promotional events, not out of spite, but exhaustion. He needed time to detox after what had turned out to be one of the most emotionally damaging shoots of his career. Over the years since then, Brosnan never named the actress in public, and the silence thus speaks volumes. His anger was not overt. It was quiet and enduring. He hated what the experience stood for, an egotic clash in a joyful space. The incident served as a reminder that in his long path to success, there will always be people with the gift of turning light into darkness. While the musical was a laughter and nostalgia trip for audiences, for Pierce Brosnan it became a reminder of one of the rare actors he truly hated working with and one of the few professional relationships he would never dredge up again. For Pierce, it was not so much the disarray as the disillusionment of what the project was meant to be. Mamma Mia was meant to be the shining light after years of darkness. It was his chance to relight joy, free himself from the burdens of bond, anguish, and personal tragedy. Instead, it reminded him that even in the most colorful places, poison could find a home. Just when you think it couldn't get more ruthless, Hollywood proved it could. The industry executive. If there's one figure in Pierce Brosnan's life that stirs genuine hatred, it's not an actor, co-star, or critic. It's the faceless executive who ended his reign as James Bond with a single emotionless phone call. After 4 blockbuster Bond films and nearly a decade as 007, Brosnan was preparing for a triumphant 5th outing. He had been brainstorming storylines, staying in peak shape, and pitching ideas for what was to be Bond 21. But on a quiet afternoon in the Bahamas in 2004, everything came crashing down. The phone rang at 2:47 p.m. The voice on the other end didn't even belong to a producer, just a middleman delivering the verdict. "You were a great James Bond. Thank you very much. Goodbye." There was no meeting, no warning, no farewell dinner or handshake. The conversation lasted just 47 seconds. To Brosnan, it wasn't just a firing, it was a public execution done in private. At that point, Die Another Day had just become the highest-grossing Bond film in history, pulling in $431.9 million worldwide. Brosnan had delivered 4 films that collectively made over $1.4 billion, revived a franchise that had nearly collapsed, and introduced Bond to a new generation. None of that mattered. The decision had been made months earlier. The studio wanted a younger Bond, a rebooted direction, and a clean break. Brosnan wasn't part of that vision, and the man who cut him loose didn't even have the decency to tell him face to face. Behind the scenes, internal studio emails revealed that executives had already been screen testing replacements for 2 years. While Pierce was still in the role, he had been cast out silently while believing he was still the franchise's future. To make matters worse, the moment was timed when he was at his most vulnerable, alone on location, disconnected from his support team. Industry insiders later admitted that this tactic wasn't accidental. One said bluntly, "They waited until he was isolated. They didn't want resistance." Brosnan, who had remained loyal to the Bond brand even when it nearly collapsed in the 90s, was discarded with chilling efficiency. The executive responsible has never been publicly named, but those in the industry know who he is. A rising force at the studio at the time, this figure saw Brosnan not as an icon or partner, but as an obstacle. He considered Brosnan too expensive, too old, and, ironically, too Bond. His polished persona had become both his signature and his curse. Studios didn't know how to cast him in anything else. As soon as he was dropped, his asking price plummeted from $12 million per film to just $3 million. He had to let go of 12 members of his team. Projects in development evaporated. In just 3 days, Pierce Brosnan went from being one of the most bankable stars in Hollywood to a man scrambling to redefine himself. Friends would later explain that the emotional fallout was tremendous. Brosnan sank into a period of quiet depression. His children saw him weep, something that had scarcely happened even after their mother's death. He was just crushed, said one intimate friend of his for many years. He had given everything to Bond, and then he was just erased. That was more than losing a role. It was about the loss of identity, the loss of years of work, the loss of a legacy he was still cultivating. The creative decision may have hurt less than the frigid manner in which it had been carried out. Not just fired, but wiped from existence by the man himself. When the trailer for Casino Royale came out, Brosnan seemed to bear the brunt of his suffering in silence, watching without asking questions or passing comments. Although Brosnan himself made few remarks on the subject, those close to him said they could see how pained he was. He had fought for that role twice, in the 80s when NBC had blocked him with Remington Steele, and again after losing the very woman who had brought him the role, Cassandra Harris. When all was said and done in 1994, that was not just a victory for him, but the fulfillment of a promise to his wife. This made the betrayal even harder to take. He hadn't just been replaced. He had a knife thrust deep into his back by the very system he had worked to keep alive. Over the years, Brosnan has avoided naming the executive publicly, but his contempt is unmistakable. He has talked about it in interviews, calling the moment utterly shocking, brutal, and deeply disrespectful. Since then, Brosnan has practically revitalized his career in The Matador, The Ghost Writer, and starring as Dr. Fate in Black Adam. But that scar remains. Different from other trashed grievances, friends who have taken roles, sons lost to addiction, co-stars with egos, this was not personal. It was systemic. A corporate decision made with detachment. And for a man who values loyalty, the betrayal felt like a dagger to the heart. One never sees Brosnan return to Bondland. No cameos or promotional activities, even as a gathering member. Requests from fans and press alike for any kind of appearance have been politely ignored. The wound must be deep. Though the exec is nameless in public, for Pierce, he is the one who ended an era without grace, without honor, and without looking him in the eye. That decision haunts Brosnan from his long career marked with anguish. Yet, there was an even more stinging silence that followed. Not one call was made by the producers. No tribute, no thanks montage, and no press releases to honor his name. Hollywood simply moved on. For a man who had literally risked life and limb in performing his own stunts, including a hair-raising bungee jump in GoldenEye, this was deafening. If you found this story as intense as we did, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes truths, and drop a comment. Which actor shocked you the most? And don't go just yet. Click on the next video on your screen to dive even deeper into Hollywood's untold stories.